All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one-stop shop for everything Commanders. We are now transitioning out of the draft into fantasy football. I could think of nobody better for our first fantasy football episode of the year. My good buddy Dave Kluge. Dave, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, man. Looking forward to it. I didn't realize you guys were just dipping into fantasy content at this point in the season. So happy
Yeah,
to help you guys out a little bit. I've been doing some deep dives myself these last few weeks. This is a good time of year. I always say that fantasy football, like the season, we talk dynasty and all that year round, but like the fantasy football season, in my opinion, starts right after the draft.
Agreed.
yeah, we spend all, from the end of the season all the way up to the draft. We're banging out draft content, and then we get excited about this. And George and I have the same thought on this. We enjoy getting folks on that know more about it than us, and then we just pepper them with questions till we know more. We'll attempt to do that today. There's so many different ways to play fantasy football now. It's kind of like a two-part question. Is redraft still the most popular way to play? And what is your favorite way to play?
That's a tough question. My favorite, because I love them all. You're like asking me to pick my favorite child here. Redraft is still absolutely king, and like Dynasty has grown, and Best Ball has grown, and DFS, had its time. But I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I would guess that like 90+% of fantasy leagues are still just your typical redraft league. That's what people like to play. We kind of get in our circles of the internet where everybody is hardcore and everybody plays Dynasty and all that, but I don't think that's really gone close to mainstream yet. And we see that, producing content of football guys. Our redraft content is really what keeps the light on over there, and the Dynasty content is more for the hardcore players. But my favorite, I think I've really gotten into best ball over the last couple of years. And if anything, I think that kind of sharpens my skills for redraft season. We all love mock drafting, but you've been in a mock draft before where in the middle of your mock draft, after 3 or 4 rounds, people start dropping out, and then you're drafting against computers and it's not really helping you whatsoever. The way best ball is set up, you can do leagues for as cheap as $3 and then just kind of do a bunch of those and kind of use that as a form of mock drafting, seeing how the boards are falling this year, what players are going where, what strategies work, what strategies don't work. So over the last couple of years, I've done 500 plus drafts every single offseason on Underdog. And then I feel like that just gets me that much sharper and ready to go when redraft rolls around.
This is a no judgment zone. How many leagues will you be in this year?
I'm actually not. I do a lot of best ball leagues, 500 plus every single year. But as far as dynasty leagues, I'm pretty particular about the leagues that I join, because I know a lot of people join a ton of dynasty leagues and don't put in the effort, and then those leagues flame out after 2 or 3 years. So I think I'm in 8 dynasty leagues, and then redraft leagues vary every single year, but I'll usually do between like 8 and 12 redraft leagues as well. So I mean, that's a lot for the average person, but I typically keep it under 20 managed leagues a year. And I know compared to a lot of my peers, that is much, much lower.
We've heard some nasty, nasty numbers on the podcast.
I know people that are in like hundreds, and I don't know how they do it.
It's a full-time job to do that many.
Yeah.
Where are you on IDP? You get into that very much?
I do. I'm in a couple of IDP leagues.
Growing a little bit the last couple of years now.
It is, yeah. And I think the problem is, like, so many people sour on IDP because they're playing IDP the wrong way. A lot of people will just do like 1 IDP spot or 2 IDP spots in their league. And if you're playing that way, you're essentially looking at IDP players the same way you're looking at kickers or defenses. You can just stream them weekly. They don't really have any value. You wait till the final rounds of your draft and just pick one up and then drop them and pick up a new guy. If you really want to commit to IDP and like get the most value out of these players and get the most value out of the format, I think you have to have a balance. Like if you're doing 8 offensive players, you should also have 8 individual defensive players. And that's how you really get the best out of your IDP leagues. And I'm in a couple of those, and they're fun, but I do not consider myself an IDP expert at all.
Dave, are you starting to see a lot of Superflex leagues with double quarterbacks? Like I feel like it's starting to grow a lot over the past couple of years. Are you seeing that in your circles as well?
Yeah. Dynasty in particular, it's gotten much, much bigger in there. And I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to play, because I understand that it, pushes up the value of quarterbacks.
It does.
But in Dynasty, that kind of happens on its own already because of the longevity of quarterbacks. Running backs are such a volatile position that, those rankings are changing on a near weekly basis. And I think we've kind of doubled the importance of quarterbacks in a way. Like, quarterbacks are already important because of the longevity in dynasty leagues, and then having to play 2 quarterbacks, we even double the importance more. And I don't dislike it. I mean, that's how I play most of my dynasty leagues. But if you're in startups nowadays, you see it. Like, in the first 12 picks in round 1, you're usually looking
All
at
quarterbacks.
10 quarterbacks going
Yeah.
on the board. By the time you get into round 4, you're drafting backup quarterbacks. I feel like we've skewed a little too far on
Mhm.
out quarterbacks and boosting their value to the point that now when you're in an IDP or when you're in a dynasty startup, and if it's super flex, it's really just a mad dash to see who can get the quarterbacks first.
Mm.
It's always funny when you come from some of these leagues with like folk that do lots of fantasy footballing, and there's so many point schedules that, like, when I go back to my family league with people that only play one league
Yeah.
one time a year, and they're like, Superflex, tight end Superflex, 1 point, half a point. What are we doing here? And people are still drafting running backs first. And it's like, oh, there are 2 different worlds in the fantasy football universe. And sometimes when those overlap, it's an interesting thing.
Yeah. I basically get, I've commissioned my home league for 15 years now. And they basically allow me to make 1 change per offseason and won't let me do any more than that. And this is my redraft league. So, like, a couple of years ago, I was like, hey, guys, we're going to start doing half a point per reception. People were livid about it. And then we made the change, and they were like, hey, this isn't that bad. Then we did half a point per first down. Again, livid about it. And they were like, this isn't that bad. Then we started doing 0.1 point per carry, which is one of my favorite caveats to add to a league because, with the popularity rising in half PPR and PPR leagues, it's made wide receivers so valuable that if you do 0.1 point per carry, it's not a huge change, but it's enough that it skews it back over to the running backs. I know you guys are both Commanders fans, for instance. Brian Robinson was getting an extra 2.5 points every single week. So in this league where it's 0.1 point per carry and 0.5 points per first down, Brian Robinson was actually scoring as much as top 10 wide receivers were this year.
George, is this new for you? I'm going to look into this. I've not seen the 0.1 point for a carry, but it makes a lot of sense.
I've seen a lot of things like this. I've seen, like, you get a point for a first down, you get a point like for large catches, 20-yard, 50-yard catches. I kind of like those different elements to it because it broadens the pool of players you can select, right? So instead of being like having a certain amount of people that you want to pick, it kind of broadens it. Brian Robinson's now appealing. You want to get him, and he's a higher draft pick in regard to that. So I do love that.
And that's my thing. If I'm joining fantasy football leagues, I want them all to be unique and different.
Yeah, it's fun.
There's nothing wrong with being in standardized leagues, but the problem is if you're playing in a standardized league, everybody's drafting off of the same set of rankings, and it doesn't really add fun to it. When you start adding these interesting caveats, it forces you to think outside the box and think about different things. Everybody isn't drafting off the same set of rankings then, and those make for the best leagues, in my opinion. My favorite league that I'm in, it's my Dynasty home league that we've been playing for a long time now, and it's just 8 of us, so me and 7 other guys. It's an 8-team league, but it's 8 teams, and we have to start. It's not Superflex. You have to start 2 quarterbacks. There's also a Superflex spot on top of that. Start 3 running backs, start 5 wide receivers, and then 5 flex spots, plus a Superflex spot. So, I mean, it's a lot of people say, oh, 8 leagues, I'm not playing in an 8-team league. But when you have to start that many players, it actually adds a ton of strategy into the league.
Those are very interesting. When you have those different player pools, the different rules, the different regulations, you have to think about things in a different way. Right. And let's say you draft in one certain way in one typical league and you get knocked out, you kind of have to diversify and have more teams later on. So speaking of redraft, right? So you wrote an awesome article the other day that I read talking about the top 12 quarterbacks going into this upcoming season. One thing I found interesting, you still view Josh Allen as a unicorn, even though Stephon Diggs left. So I want to hear about that. And then more of a commander central question. You're pretty high on Jaden Daniels. You kind of locked them again together like tier 2 with like Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts and all that. So I thought it was pretty interesting. So let's talk about that. So why is Josh Allen so special, and why are you so high on Jaden Daniels?
Well, we saw Josh Allen last year down the stretch. Stephon Diggs was an afterthought in the offense. I mean, he really disappeared once Ken Dorsey took over that offense. Once Ken Dorsey took over, we saw a lot more pass attempts going James Cook's way. And of course, we saw Dalton Kincaid became the first read on the majority of the passing attempts. And Josh Allen, his production did not falter. He is such a good passer. He's going to be able to throw for 4,000 plus yards, regardless of who he's throwing to. But it's what he does on the ground that makes him so different. He's not the Justin Fields or the Michael Vick where he's going to rush for 1,000 plus yards in a season. But as soon as they get near the goal line, they just run that same play every single time. He takes the snap out of the shotgun. He just kind of hesitates, finds his running lane, and then just bullies his way through there. So he really gets so much of his value from rushing touchdowns, and that's not going to change. I think Keon Coleman, I'm not 1,000% sold on him as a prospect, but I think that his play style matches up well with Josh Allen, and you could argue that it matches up better with Josh Allen's play style than Stephon Diggs did. You know, he's kind of that backyard player, the go up and get the ball off the rim type of player. We've already seen him build a connection with James Cook and Dalton Kincaid, so I'm not too concerned about Josh Allen at all. He has been a top 2 QB for 4 straight seasons, and he's only had 1 year where he didn't finish as the overall QB1, so I have no concerns there. As for Jaden Daniels, I can't get enough of this guy. And those rankings that you were looking at were actually the consensus rankings between my co-host and I. My co-host is a little bit lower on Jaden Daniels than I am, so I've got him. He's my QB8 right now.
Gotcha. So sorry to interrupt you. So with Jaden Daniels, he seems to be going number 2 in dynasty leagues. He has a higher upside than Caleb Williams. Why does Caleb Williams keep getting sucked ahead of him? Is it because he's a more higher talent pool? Is it the draft capital for the Bears? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know, but I snapped him up number 1 in my league last night in the draft.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I've been saying that Jaden Daniels, you could make the argument for him to go 1.
Yeah.
I think the argument for Caleb Williams is the safety. You know, he's a bit of a safer prospect. He's a bit more refined at this point in his career. Jaden Daniels, the big red flag, and I don't care about this at all for the 2024 season. I don't think it matters, but I think the long-term red flag, I'm sure you guys have heard about it. Being Washington guys, you've probably heard everyone talk about the pressure to sack ratio. And that's something where we have seen a lot of quarterbacks struggle with longevity. We've seen it with Zach Wilson. We've seen it with Justin Fields. And I think that's kind of the fear with with Jaden Daniels, is that if he can't get these sacks under control, he could be out of a job in 2 to 3 years. I think the idea with Caleb Williams is that he does have a penchant for looking for the big plays, but he is a little bit better at reading defenses. He can get the ball out of his hands a little bit quicker. So I think people are expecting more longevity. Where like Caleb Williams, I think people are just putting it down in ink that he's going to be a starter for the next 8 to 10 years. That being said, if Jaden Daniels can get these sacks under control and he does start, like if you put Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels both in the NFL guaranteed to start for the next 8 years, I think in 100 scenarios, Jaden Daniels outscores Caleb Williams in 95 of those.
Because of the legs.
Because of the legs, yeah. And, you know, I will say Jaden Daniels is a much better passer than people, you know, talk about too. Like we're not talking about, you know, Kellen Mond here. This isn't a guy who can just run the ball and that's it. You look last year at PFF grades, Jaden Daniels was the top graded offensive player. He was also the top graded rusher, and he was the 3rd graded passer. Like, this guy is not just a one-trick pony that's going to run the ball, but of course he does run the ball well. 1,134 yards last year, led the NCAA in yards per carry, so he's got that. And then I think the landing spot as well, this is why I like him so much for the 2024 season. Like I talked about with that pressure to sack ratio, that's more of a long-term problem. It might affect his outlook in 2026, 2027. But for this 2024 season, I think the floor for Jaden Daniels is finishing as a top 12 quarterback. If he's able to rush for 1,000 plus yards, he's almost guaranteed to finish inside the top 5. We got to remember he's going to be playing with Cliff Kingsbury, the same guy that coached up Kyler Murray and instantly turned him into a fantasy QB1. And they have very similar skill sets. You could actually argue that Jaden Daniels might be a better passer at this point in his career than Kyler Murray was in 2019. So yeah, I'm very, very bullish on Jaden Daniels.
Love it.
You mentioned John Allen. I thought it was interesting. I'm looking at the ADP for football guys. Sorry, that's why I had my head down while you're talking. But I thought it interesting. Curtis Samuel's at 104. Like what? You know, I mean,
That's know probably my ranking dragging that down more than anyone else's.
It was gimmicky here, but you could see like if they had given him a prime wide receiver role, what he might be able to do. Like, what do you expect his role to be there? I know it will be Cook and Kincaid getting most of the targets there. And I agree that Cook probably is in line for even more targets this year. They brought in the rookie, but what I was with that number being that high, what do you think they're expecting his role to be this year?
I just think at this point we've seen enough from Curtis Samuel. I think he's a very good real life football player. His versatility keeps defenses on their toes. With the jet sweeps and the touches out of the backfield and the short manufactured touches, those are great. But at this point, I don't have it off the top of my head. I believe he's going into year 6 or year 7 now,
That sounds
and
right.
his best season, he's 4 years removed from his best season right now, and that was just a hair over 800 scrimmage yards. He just hasn't shown that ceiling at this point in his career. Now, it's not impossible that a change of environment and being reunited with Joe Brady could bring out the best in him, but very rarely do we see wide receivers break out an elite level at his age. I believe he's going into his age 28 season now. These are all numbers off the top of my head, so I could be
No,
slightly
that's
off
about
with
right.
them.
Yeah.
About right.
But
Yeah.
it's very rare to see a player break out at that age. So I think that he's going to be a great sort of skeleton key for the Buffalo Bills. They're going to be able to use him in ways that they don't have anybody else to use. But when I'm mapping out where the targets are going to go and where the touches are going to go, I think it's Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman on top. I think even Khalil Shakir with his comfortability with Josh Allen, I think he's ahead of Curtis Samuel in the pecking order. And then I think James Cook obviously gets more touches than Curtis Samuel as well. So I think Curtis Samuel is good, but when it comes to where the touches are going to go, unless there are injuries to multiple players ahead of him, he's probably 5th on the pecking order right now.
Okay.
So, Dave, speaking of pecking order, speaking of like well-rounded teams, right? I find there's so many interesting teams with the Eagles and the Texans and the Chicago Bears. Let's focus on the Eagles for right now. Then we'll go to Texans, right? The Eagles, Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, Saquon Barkley. Who are some players on each of these teams? The Eagles and Texans. We'll start off with them two, actually. Who is someone you absolutely have to have on the team, and people might be the odd man out you want to stay away from because they might be left out in the fantasy mold?
So I think Jalen Hurts is the guy that I really want more than anybody else in Philadelphia right now. And there were some speed bumps down the stretch last year, and I'm looking at that as injury more than anything else. It's kind of funny, you watch interviews with him last year. He kept swearing like, "No, I'm healthy. Like I'm healthy. I'm good." As he's wearing a knee brace and limping around and clearly not healthy. And I think that really limited his rushing. And that's where so much of his value comes in. And now you've got the added concern baked in, like, are they still going to be able to do the tush push without Jason Kelsey? The reality is I think Jalen Hurts is a good enough rusher that he's going to be able to keep his fantasy value afloat. If you look over the last 3 years since Jalen Hurts took over as the starter, he's number 2 in points per game behind only Josh Allen. He's surrounded by great weapons. He's got the good rushing upside. And now I think that this recency bias from last year, with the injury, with the slump down the stretch, with AJ Brown kind of throwing his fits on the sideline and then getting knocked out of the playoffs. I think a lot of people are concerned about Jalen Hurts, but he's still right behind Josh Allen for me as my QB2. Going over to the Texans, my favorite guy there, I like Joe Mixon as a value, who I'm, to be honest, not a huge fan of Joe Mixon.
I'm with you.
The player, like, he's not the most efficient. He's not that good, but I think that what he does pairs up so well with the wide zone run scheme that Bobby Slowick's going to run out there. And we've seen him have success there before. He's not a guy that is going to be ripping off 50-yard touchdowns at this point in his career. But I think the volume goes his way. Dameon Pierce is just a terrible fit for this offense right now. He looked good as a rookie, and then when they switched up the run scheme, he really, really struggled. So I think that this is just projecting volume to Joe Mixon. I don't think he's a great running back by any means, but I think that he probably finishes the year with between 1,100, 1,200 rushing yards and possibly double-digit touchdowns, and he's getting drafted all the way in the 6th, 7th, 8th round right now. But my favorite value in Houston, now that I've talked about Joe Mixon, is Tank Dell. I think Tank Dell is just unbelievable. Oh, my goodness. And he's the cheapest of the bunch right now. He's getting drafted after Nico Collins. He's getting drafted after Stephon Diggs. And if you look before his injury last year, the 4 weeks leading up to his injury, he was outplaying Nico Collins. He was more targets, more yards, more first reads, more touchdowns, more fantasy points. He kind of took over as the wide receiver 1 and then got injured. And right now he's getting drafted as the wide receiver 3 in fantasy. And I think it's well within his range of outcomes to finish as the guy.
I can see that. Good call.
Yeah, we talk all the time about one of the buzzwords, I think, for fantasy is the stacks, trying to put the stacks together. It's so interesting to me. I was looking through some of the numbers earlier. Mahomes, it feels like just 2 years ago, you'd have never in your life imagined that Mahomes is QB4 with an ADP of 36, and Kelsey is tight end 2 at 28. Like, you would have never 3 years ago imagined you put the stack together. This year, I mean, just looking at the numbers, you can start with Kelsey and get Mahomes later. It's wild, and that outside of that, I'm curious if you have some other stacks that you really like this year.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, that one right now this year is crazy to me. I did a draft the other day where I started off, I got Garrett Wilson in round 1, took Marvin Harrison in round 2, which I think a lot of people are a little turned off by taking a rookie that early, but I'm okay with it. But I got Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison, and then I got Travis Kelce and Mahomes in the 3rd and 4th round. And I said, this should be flip-flop. I should be getting Travis Kelce and Mahomes in the 1st and 2nd round, and these guys a little bit later, but I was happy with the way it worked out. As for my favorite stacks, do you want like a good high profile stack? Because if I'm going to go with that,
like personally, like
I really like Marvin Harrison.
Like to have on your team this year.
I like Marvin Harrison. I like the double stack that I like to do is Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride, and Kyler Murray. I like getting all 3 of those guys because I think that the entire passing offense is going to be pretty hyper focused through those 2. And then you've also got the standalone value in Kyler Murray, a guy who's basically been a top 5 quarterback every year he's been in the league because of his rushing upside. They've got some other weapons there. They just brought in Zay Jones. Michael Wilson showed some flashes last year, but I think you can look at about 60 to 65% of the targets going to Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride. So I really do like that stack. My favorite discount stack, and I'm talking like super, super cheap here, Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears, and Will Levis. And I know that's not what you normally think of when you're thinking about stacks here, but these are both running backs that are really good at catching the ball out of the backfield. And we've seen Brian Callahan likes to draw up pass attempts going to his running backs. Both of these guys have very versatile skill sets. Now, I think the problem is trying to project how the workloads are going to be split in Tennessee. It's not the same thing it was last year where you've got Derrick Henry, he's getting the early down work. And then on long and distance and 3rd down, Tajay Spears is coming in. Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears can kind of do all of the same things. So what I like to do in my drafts this year is try to draft one of those guys and then get Will Levis later, just because I don't know exactly how the backfield is going to shake out. But if Tony Pollard gets injured, Tajay Spears is suddenly a top 10 running back. And if Tajay Spears gets injured, Tony Pollard is suddenly a top 10 running back. So I don't know who it's going to go to. It might be a 50-50 split, but I'm willing to draft both of those guys and then tie them with Will Levis in the final rounds of my draft for a really cheap and kind of unique stack.
We've got a exercise that we like to do. We'll call it the vet versus the rookie. I'll give you 2 names with their ADP, and you tell me which one you'd rather have.
All right.
So we'll start out like this. It's say Roma Dunze at 99 or DK Metcalf at 38.
DK Metcalf for me, and I love Roma Dunze as like the football player. I think he's fantastic, but his path to relevancy is going to be so tough in 2024. First of all, Caleb Williams. I was talking about how much I like Caleb Williams earlier. At the end of the day, no rookie quarterback has ever supported multiple 1,000-yard receivers. It's never happened. CJ Stroud was getting close to it last year, and had Tank Dell not gotten hurt, maybe he would have done it, but it's never happened. Cam Newton, Andrew Luck, CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert, you can go back. Nobody's ever done it before. And the way it looks right now, Roma Dunze is probably the wide receiver 3 behind Keenan Allen and behind DJ Moore. So I just don't.
That offense is kind of stacked up there now.
It sure is. And let's not forget they added DeAndre Swift. They've still got Cole Kmet, Shane Waldron, who worked with Gerald Everett in Seattle and Los Angeles, brought Gerald Everett into the fold as well. There's a lot of good players. Still got Khalil Herbert, still got Roshan Johnson. Caleb Williams falls into a nice spot. So I like Caleb Williams' outlook this year, but I fear that Roma Dunze is going to kind of be on that Jackson Smith Najigba trajectory, where we know he's really good, but it's just going to be hard for him to see the field as a rookie.
Jaden Daniels at 141 or Jordan Love at 70?
Oh, that's easily Jaden Daniels for me. I think not even considering ADPs, like just looking at the player, I could make an argument for Jaden Daniels ahead of Jordan Love, and the fact that you can get him rounds cheaper is just an added benefit. We just did a show that I recorded about an hour ago. It's coming out as soon as I'm done with this. We did an episode with JJ Zacharyson, and it's really good when I have a smart mind on like JJ Zacharyson, and he is in full agreement with me. We both agreed that Jaden Daniels is the best value right now in fantasy drafts.
Love it.
Brock Bowers at 116 or Mark Andrews at 43?
I'd rather pay up for Andrews in this scenario. We've seen Andrews has just been like a 30% target share machine since he came into the league. And now you look at Zay Flowers, and obviously that's going to take away from his workload a little bit. But I think that they operate in such different parts of the field that it could actually benefit Mark Andrews. And I like Brock Bowers. I do. But he is another guy that might be more of a long play. Like I just said with Roma Dunze, he's good, but Jacoby Myers is good, and Devontae Adams is good, and I think this is going to be a run-first offense as well. So I like Brock Bowers' long-term outlook, but it's hard for me to get too excited about him in 2024.
Marshawn Lloyd at 180 or Javonte Williams at 94?
Can I say neither?
I'm about to say.
I'm not crazy about either of these guys.
Like Lloyd's workload in Green Bay? I mean, I understand I understand that, but
yeah, and I think like if I have to choose one of these guys, I'll choose Marshawn Lloyd because of the contingent upside. If something happens to Josh Jacobs, we're going to see a huge workload go to Marshawn Lloyd on a good offense. But that's the only reason I do it. As for Denver, I'm really not sold on Javonte Williams. Maybe he can bounce back from that injury, but it seems like that injury just took away everything that we loved about him as a rookie. He hasn't had the same burst. He hasn't had the ability to miss defenders and break through tackles like he did early in his career. And then on top of that, he's not a great pass catcher either. Well, I take that back. He's a pretty good pass catcher, but he's not as good as Jaleel McLaughlin. And Jaleel McLaughlin is a guy that's getting a lot of the passing down work. They've also got Samaje Perine, who's a great pass blocker, which gets him on the field for passing down work as well. So that's kind of my fear with Javonte Williams, is that he's going to be the early down guy in a really crowded backfield. Got to remember they also added Audric Estime this offseason as well. So this is kind of a four-headed committee right now on a bad offense. So I don't see many paths to relevancy for Javonte Williams to pay off, where with Marshawn Lloyd, even though I'm not crazy about drafting him at cost, all it takes is Josh Jacobs to tweak an ankle, and then we're looking at Marshawn Lloyd as a top 10, top 12 weekly running back.
Former Redskin Samaje Perine feels like he's been in the league for 20 years. And I don't even think he's 30 yet, which is crazy to me.
Yep.
Dave, do you have a preference over? Sorry, I'm done.
No, go ahead.
Over Brian Robinson or Austin Eckler in the Commanders' backfield?
That's a tough question. We talked about earlier. A lot of people have soured on Jalen Hurts because of the injury, and I think that same thing happened with Austin Eckler. There was that clip where Austin Eckler got chased down by a defensive end, and everyone's like, "Oh, Austin Eckler's injured," or Austin Eckler's toast. But the reality is he was injured leading up to that game, and he had taken 6 straight carries leading up to that. He just didn't have anything left in the tank. But of course, that goes viral on social media, and everyone thinks Austin Eckler is washed. I think he still has some left in the tank, but it's also pretty rare to see a running back have a down season at age 28 or 29 and then bounce back in their age 29, age 30 season. I think the only reason I might prefer Eckler ever so slightly is because he's going to be catching all the passes. Brian Robinson's going to get the early down work, and so much of Brian Robinson's work last year was inflated by touchdowns, which is hard to kind of project year over year. So I do prefer Austin Eckler to Brian Robinson, but it's a tough one. That could really go either way.
Somebody told me some years ago, remember when Terry McLaurin was catching footballs from some guy that's not in the league anymore, and I was asking about quarterback production and how it affects receivers. It might have been Matt Harmon who said, target shares will be target shares no matter who's throwing them the ball. So I was hoping you'd explain it, because I think a lot of people in the fan base assume Jaden Daniels plus Terry McLaurin equals, fire emoji. And probably, but it's not exactly apples to apple. Better quarterback is going to lead to more production. Would you explain that just a little bit?
Well, I think what he said is target share, and that is if you look year over year, target share is pretty sticky. A guy who's pulling 27% of the targets on a team, if he goes to another team, regardless of the competition, he's probably going to continue pulling about a 27% target share. The difference is, think about that as being like a slice of a pie. So you're looking at the whole pie, and Terry McLaurin's getting this 27% right here. But when Jaden Daniels comes into town, that pie gets a lot bigger. So even though he's getting the same slice of a pie, it's now a much bigger slice because he's cutting from a bigger pie. So last year, where Sam Howell was actually pretty good, I mean, if you look at his volume stats, but he still had his shortcomings as a quarterback. So assuming Jaden Daniels can throw for more yards and is also providing more quality targets, even if Terry McLaurin maintains the same target share he's maintained over the last few years, better quality targets and a more potent overall offense should help his production go up.
I tell you, he'll be hard. Say what you want about Hal. He'll be hard pressed to get more yards. How was it almost 4,000 yards last year? Granted, it was on like 60 passes a game.
Right.
But the people are always like, oh, the numbers will be better with the statistically they may be better, but Sam was putting up big numbers last year because they just said, keep throwing it, pal.
Yeah, I want, like, you guys as Washington fans, I wonder how you feel about it, because I love Terry McLaurin, man. I loved him in college, throughout the pros. Like, he has been one of my favorite players to watch. But he's getting up there in age now. What? I think he's 29 this year. And, like we said, it's very rare to see a wide receiver, suddenly break out and have that like super elite season. So, I don't want to say that it's like a lost career by any means, but like I think Terry McLaurin's one of those guys that we'll be looking back at 15, 20 years from now. Like, you just had to see it for yourself. Like, you look at the stat sheet, it might not be all that impressive, but like when you watch that dude, he's a certified baller out there.
Well, and for a guy that Jay Gruden pounded the table just so they could get him on special teams to where he is now, when you talk about one of those stories that everybody loves that comes out of the NFL, Terry's is definitely one of those dudes. And to a man, he's the leader in the clubhouse and just can't find a better dude, which it's nice when the football player that you respect and admire for their work on the field is also worthy of that off the field, because it don't happen like that.
Yeah, and I mean, he like really embodies like what you see with a lot of those kind of like old school guys, like the Anquan Boldens and the Larry Fitzgeralds and the DeAndre Hopkins. Like, he's never getting in trouble. Like, he's never a diva, never complains about the situation or anything like just goes out there and puts in the work. I mean, hopefully we can see him have that like career year this year with Jaden Daniels. I think the thing that does bode well for him is he might actually see a little bump in his target share this year, just because what we've seen historically from rookie quarterbacks, I talked about how no rookie quarterback has ever had multiple 1,000-yard receivers. Typically, as quarterbacks age, we see them start to become more mature passers, reading the defense, spreading the ball out a little bit. A lot of times we'll see rookies just hyper fixate on their guy.
Good point.
With Terry McLaurin being the clear-cut wide receiver one with almost no competition for that, he might actually see a slight bump in target share this year as a rookie like Jaden Daniels just kind of forces him the ball as much as he can.
One more before we get out of here. I'm curious your thoughts on the tight end, Ben Sinnott.
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest. I don't do a ton of college scouting at tight ends. I kind of focus on the wide receivers, quarterbacks, and it's so unpredictable. Obviously, I know Brock Bowers, playing at Georgia. I got to watch him a lot. He's a great player. I don't have a super strong take on Ben Sinnott. He's currently ranked as my tight end 2 just because of the production that we saw in college. Looks like he's getting quickly acclimated from the camps that we've seen at rookie minicamp. But I'd be talking out of my behind if I tried to give you a strong take on Ben Sinnott, and I don't want to do that.
Well, and for Ben at least, there's nobody standing in the way. So
right.
He's got.
Zach Ertz, who's 36, 37 at this point. Yeah, coming off of another injury.
In a year and a half or whatever. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I like what Washington has done. The other guy is Luke McCaffrey that they added here as well. So I think it's a very similar situation to Caleb Williams. Might not have the same star power with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore and these really, really big names, but I mean, there isn't a weakness there. He's got a good running back in Brian Robinson who could do the early down stuff. He's got a good pass catching running back in Austin Eckler. He's got Scary Terry. He's got Jahan Dotson. He's got Sinnott, and he's got Zach Ertz. They're just so many weapons there in Washington for him this year that I'm really, really excited for Jaden Daniels.
Dave, you're the best, buddy. We always appreciate having you on the show. You say the podcast with JJ comes out today. What else you got coming?
Besides that, I got a show that we do on Friday mornings at 11 a.m. Eastern. Just started that last week. This is a best ball stream that we're hosting on Underdog. Every single week, we're drafting a best ball mania team, trying to win $1.5 million. But the big thing is we started our YouTube channel from zero just about a week ago. Alfredo Brown and I, we were on the same YouTube channel as Sigmund Bloom and Cecil Lammy, and realized that we kind of fostered this split audience where like half of the subscribers were there for them, half of them were there for us. So Alfredo and I, we decided to start from zero. So we're building out our own football guys YouTube channel right now. You can find it youtube.com/footballguysfantasy.
And so you go, if they go to YouTube for it, it's on the Football Guys channel. It's a separate channel on the main channel.
Right. So we broke it up into 3 separate channels now. So you've got the Audible, which is Sigmund Bloom and Cecil Lammy. You've got the Football Guys Fantasy Show, which is Alfredo Brown and I. And then we've also got the Football Guys Dynasty channel, which is Jeff Bell and Jagger May. And then in addition to, you know, kind of the 2 standards on every single channel, we also bring in an eclectic mix of guests. So I had Pete Overzet on Friday. We had JJ Zachariason on today. And then we'll do some cross-pollination as well. You know, later this week, I'm going on the Dynasty channel with Jeff and Jagger, and we'll have Jagger come on our show too. So you can find us all over the place, but just trying to keep it a little bit more compartmentalized with where the shows are. So we aren't just doing all of our content on one channel. 6
of the best guys in the industry.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Well, 5.
We appreciate you, brother. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, man.
All right, Dave.